On a freezing morning when most hearts were closed and the city moved in silence, a millionaire hears 5 words from a little girl at the checkout counter that freeze him in place and crack open a memory he thought was buried forever. What starts as a simple act of kindness becomes a race against time, a fight against poverty, and a journey that changes everything for a broken family and for the man who thought he had it all. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video and tell us where are you watching from. Now let's jump into the story. Frost settled on the small town like a quiet blanket. Window glass shimmered with thin ice ribbons catching the first pale light. Inside the corner grocery on Maple Street, fluorescent tubes hummed gently and the automatic doors gave a tired sigh. Each time someone slipped back into the cold, on this dawn the sighs were few, because most neighbors hid beneath quilts and promised themselves a later trip. The aisles felt wider without crowds, and the floor glowed from a fresh mop. Even the fruit stood straighter as though grateful for breathing space. The hush was broken only by distant radio music and the soft scrape of a single shopping basket. Graham Alder walked that basket down the produce lane, breathing in the sharp perfume of stacked oranges. His tailored coat and polished shoes looked out of place among discount signs and flickering bulbs, yet he moved slowly as if time itself had thinned in the chill. A cinnamon roll behind a fogged glass dome sparked a memory of weekend breakfasts before ambition claimed his calendar. He added the roll plus a bottle of black coffee, telling himself small comforts were worth braving the frost. He almost headed for the register when the faint shape of a child in an oversized coat caught his eye. Curiosity tugged at him like a whisper he could not quite hear. Ruby Wells, only 5 years old, yet already steady as a lighthouse, entered the dairy aisle with quiet resolve. Her pea-green coat hung nearly to her ankles, and unraveled mittens clung to her wrists. Bright cereal mascots waved from every shelf. But Ruby ignored the colored enticement. She reached on tiptoe for the very last bottle of milk. When her hands closed around it, she hugged the plastic tight as though warmth could travel through it. Finn, her baby brother, burned with fever in their drafty apartment, and her mother Helen coughed through every other breath. The milk felt heavier than gold because it promised relief. Balancing on small boots, Ruby hurried toward the single open checkout lane. Graham stood ahead of her at the belt. The cashier Miriam scanned his items with the practiced speed of someone who had already faced too long a night. Ruby slipped behind him so quietly that only the squeak of her boots announced her presence. The belt carried Graham's coffee forward, and Miriam murmured the total. As Graham reached for his wallet, a clear young voice rose like a bell in a cathedral. "Excuse me, ma'am, can I pay later?" Ruby lifted the milk with shaking hands, yet her gaze stayed firm. "My brother is sick and my mama is resting. I will bring the money soon." Miriam's tired features softened, but the rule book pressed hard on her shoulders. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, we can't do that. Do you have any money at all?" Ruby's cheeks flushed, though she did not step back. "Not right now," she said, "but I keep promises." Graham felt something tighten behind his ribs, recalling nights when promise was the only currency he possessed. Words tumbled out before caution could stop them. "I will cover it." His tone came out rough as though he had swallowed gravel. Ruby blinked confusion and pride, swirling like snowflakes in her wide brown eyes. "You don't have to," she whispered. "Can I come back later?" Graham crouched so their eyes met. "Sometimes we all need help," he said softly, "when you can help someone else instead." Ruby weighed those words, then nodded solemnly. "I promise." Miriam slid the milk into a small paper bag and handed it to Ruby. The girl clutched it as if it contained an entire future. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice no louder than a falling leaf. She turned and hurried through the doors into the sharp morning air, leaving only the echo of her vow. Graham straightened and paid for his own items, but felt the space beside him stretched too wide. Miriam leaned forward and whispered that the Wells family lived in Linwood House by the river, due for demolition next month. Eviction notes already hung like warnings on every door. Graham stepped into the frost-heavy street and watched Ruby vanish around the corner. He could have driven home to his warm apartment, or boarded the jet waiting to whisk him toward another deal, yet his feet remained planted. Steam drifted from sewer grates like unanswered questions, and in that hush Graham Alder realized he was no longer thinking about dividends or deadlines. He was thinking about a promise held tighter than any contract. He pulled his collar high and faced the direction Ruby had gone, feeling the cold bite through wool and through habit. The bottle of coffee warmed his glove, yet it could not warm the sudden ache in his chest. For the first time in many seasons, Graham felt the strange, fragile weight of possibility. Somewhere ahead, a child was carrying hope inside a paper bag, and he found himself stepping forward into the wind, willing to follow where that hope might lead. Night wrapped the city in silence, yet Graham Alder sat awake at his office window, watching distant traffic lights blur. Ruby Wells had vanished into the frost, yet her small, steady voice still echoed in his mind. The milk had cost less than a screw in his jet, but her thanks felt heavier than the engine that carried him. Coffee cooled on the desk while numbers on the tablet turned meaningless. Somewhere inside, a long locked door creaked and childhood memories drifted through the crack. He remembered being 10, clutching a paper lunch ticket like a winning stub, afraid the cafeteria woman would read the debt aloud. He remembered bedrooms that smelled of bleach and damp, where he traced ceiling cracks instead of hearing stories. He remembered stuffing his few clothes into black trash bags, each time a new foster promise dissolved like fog at sunrise. With every thought, his chest tightened as though a hand were shoving him back into those drafty halls. Ruby's resolve mirrored the silent vows he once whispered beneath flickering streetlights, vows to escape hunger and never look back. Just after 3, his assistant texted a final reminder about the investors' retreat in the tropics beginning. At noon, Graham should have felt a thrill about pitching his microchip to eager billionaires, yet the itinerary looked like someone else's life. He typed back, "Cancel the jet, meeting postponed," then set the phone face down. The blue glow faded, leaving only the hum of the city and the steady thud of his heart. He rose, slipped on the same coat from the market, and walked out without telling security. Rain greeted him outside, sliding like liquid copper along empty avenues. The limousine waited in the garage, but leather seats felt wrong to his restless bones. He chose an aging sedan and typed Linwood House into the map. The route glowed pale across districts he usually saw only from helicopter windows. Neon signs reflected in puddles like broken constellations, and each traffic light seemed to breathe slower than usual. He wondered if Ruby and her mother were awake, or fever dreams still tangled around Finn's small body. The streets grew narrower as old row houses leaned together, leaving only a ribbon of sky. Linwood House rose ahead, 3 sagging stories, its windows boarded and graffiti curled across the bricks. A lone grocery cart stood guard like a rusted sentinel. Rain overflowed, a broken gutter forming a river along the curb. Graham cut the engine and stepped into the drizzle, clutching the untouched cinnamon roll. Memory of cafeteria lines pushed him forward toward the chipped doorway Ruby had surely passed. Ruby opened the lobby door before he could knock her pale face framed by the peeling green paint. Surprise flickered, then softened. Graham knelt and offered the small bag. "I brought breakfast," he said, hoping the gesture bridged fear. She led him upstairs that creaked like winter branches. The hallway smelled of boiled potatoes and damp plaster. In apartment 3B, Helen Wells sat wrapped in a quilt, her cough sharp. Her eyes hardened the moment she saw him. "We don't take charity, sir," she rasped. Graham kept his voice steady. "I only came to check on you. My name is Graham Alder. I met Ruby at the store." Ruby whispered, "Mama, he paid for the milk, remember?" Helen's shoulders sagged. "You traveled far for strangers," she murmured. Graham replied, "I grew up in places like this, and someone once helped me." Finn coughed from the bedroom, a raw rattle that cut through conversation. Graham drew his phone. "My friend Jordan runs a clinic nearby. He said let me bring him here. He owes me more favors than I can count." Helen hesitated, but Ruby placed her small palm on her mother's shaking hand. "Mama, please," she whispered. The gentle sound tipped the balance, and Helen nodded. Footsteps thundered on the stairwell, and a man in a bright yellow city jacket entered. holding a clipboard, rain dripping from his hood. Notice of immediate evacuation, he announced in a bored monotone. Linwood House failed structural review. Occupants must leave within 48 hours. Ruby's eyes widened and Helen sagged against the sofa. Graham felt his pulse pound like drums. Marching into battle, he accepted the notice and folded it once, then twice, while an iron decision forged itself in his chest. He would not let the past repeat in these damp hallways, not for Ruby, not for any child within these tired walls. Rain softened to mist by morning, yet the street before Linwood House throbbed as yellow machines idled by the curb. Steel noses like wolves testing a fence. Graham Alder stood in the doorway steadying Ruby while Finn coughed on Helen's shoulder. Eviction clock showed 27 hours and falling. Jordan Price arrived in a weathered hatchback, medical bag clinking. He dashed through puddles up cracked steps, shaking rain from his hair. Ruby watched him with guarded eyes, weighing trust. Meanwhile, Graham waved him inside, urging haste. The inspector had hinted demolition might start early if contractors found a gap. Inside the dim apartment, Jordan laid, stethoscope against Finn's thin chest, listening as each breath scraped like sandpaper. The diagnosis came swift and sober: pneumonia with a fever too high for home care. Helen's own lungs rasped like broken accordions. Jordan scribbled urgent notes and said they all needed the clinic before night spilled cold again. Helen tightened her quilt like armor, her voice cracked with pride. "We will not leave our things or neighbors," she murmured. "Linwood House may crumble, but it holds memories." Graham knelt, meeting her weary gaze. "Memories matter," he said, "yet living too. Remember them matters more." His words hung challenging, years of endurance. Ruby stepped forward, boots splashing in a ceiling leak. She looked at her mother and repeated her store. "Promise, Mama. We help others when we can. Maybe Mr. Graham is our someone now." Helen's shoulders sagged. She whispered, "All right, help us move." Within an hour, Jordan escorted Finn and Helen to his clinic in a borrowed van, while Graham and Ruby raced back upstairs, gathering blankets, photos, and a single stuffed bunny. They filled 2 laundry baskets, then descended the stairs, passing neighbors who stared with curious fear. Each goodbye felt like ripping thread from a thin sweater. Graham drove them to a modest hotel near the river. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and pastries. Ruby clutched the room key like it unlocked a new universe. Helen sank onto a white duvet, coughing softer, but wide-eyed at the silence. No dripping pipes, no shouting, only the hush of conditioned air. Back in the parking lot, Graham dialed Selena Rogers, a real estate genius who once turned an abandoned mill into artist lofts. She answered before the second ring. He explained the eviction, the children, the impossible deadline. Selena loved impossible. She promised a safe, bright apartment within 1 week, then texted 3 listings before the call ended. Selena promised sunrise light for the children, sketched on a napkin window here, garden boxes there, a small reading nook. Ruby can paint the wall. She laughed, hope flickered warm inside Graham. Paperwork surged like floodwater, leases, medical forms, bank transfers. Graham's email pinged with bored questions about his retreat absence. He replied, occupied with a local crisis, will update soon. Some investors frowned, others glimpsed a new kind of leadership. He noted the shift for later. At the clinic, Jordan hung an X-ray against a lightbox. Finn's lungs showed murky shadows, but antibiotics dripped into his fore, battling back the storm. Helen rested in a recliner, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching numbers on monitors climb toward safety. Ruby pressed sticker bandages onto her brother's arm, humming a lullaby almost forgotten. Night dropped fresh worry. Linwood House still held many families without cars or savings. Graham paced clinic halls, phone to ear, arranging ride shares and storage. Selena forwarded vacant units from kind landlords willing to skip deposits if a guarantor signed. Graham signed. Just before dawn, Mr. Dixon, the elder tenant, called Graham from a payphone. His voice shook. Demolition crew moved timetable. Sunrise. They swing at 8, he said. I am packing, but neighbors need guidance. Graham's pulse hammered. He told Dixon, gather everyone in the courtyard. Graham drafted a group message to friends, staff, and even rivals, requesting vans, blankets, soup, and willing hands. He wrote, "Help families today, meet at Linwood." Now the first yes arrived in 90 seconds. By 7:30, a convoy of vehicles rolled. East headlights slicing foghorns blaring like distant geese. Ruby watched from the clinic window as the convoy passed heading east. Her eyes shone with awe when she realized those cars answered their promise. She whispered to Finn, "See, we are helping." Now too, Graham smiled, tired, but a live purpose surged through him, hotter than any boardroom victory. At 8 sharp, the wrecking ball struck Linwood House, yet the courtyard was empty. Families waited across the street, clutching boxes while volunteers formed chains loading essentials into trucks. Graham thanked Mr. Dixon, who handed him a battered notebook of tenant names, saying, "Keep us together, son." Graham nodded. The race was no longer against rubble, it was against forgetting. Sunlight spilled across Mapleview Street, painting new bricks with honey gold, while a soft breeze carried the smell of fresh bread and blooming petunias. Parents pushed strollers past slender trees still wrapped in nursery tags, and neighbors waved as if eager to memorize every friendly face. The entire block felt like something lifted from a hopeful sketchbook, where no page ever tore. In the middle of this gentle bustle, Ruby Wells twirled on the sidewalk, her pea-green coat replaced by a sky-blue jacket, 2 sizes too big, but promising room to grow. Inside apartment 12B, Helen stirred oatmeal, humming between breaths that no longer rattled. Finn sat in a high chair, banging a plastic spoon, his laughter bright and splashy like water over river stones. Sun slipped through wide windows, touching framed photos Ruby had arranged the night before. Each picture showed laughter, catching light that Linwood House walls had once swallowed. Helen glanced around the clean space where no plaster crumbled, and whispered a quiet thank you sent to any sky willing to listen. Graham Alder arrived carrying 3 boxes of art supplies labeled Rooftop Dream Garden. He paused at the doorway, soaking in the warm air flavored by cinnamon and safety. Ruby dashed over her sneakers, squeaking across polished floors. She tugged his sleeve, saying, "Come see our balcony, it is huge like a stage." Helen smiled shyly, still surprised that gratitude could fill a room faster than worry. Graham followed Ruby past potted herbs to a tiny railing that overlooked the freshly painted courtyard, where volunteers set up folding tables. By noon, colored paper lanterns swayed overhead, and a speaker hummed gentle jazz, while children chased one another, weaving between grown-ups spreading checkered cloths. Jordan Price mingled with clinic nurses, handing out healthy snacks and reminding families to schedule follow-up visits. Selena Rogers balanced a clipboard, ticking boxes with quick strokes as new tenants signed leases she had negotiated down to almost nothing. At the center, a banner fluttered, reading, "Brick by brick, a new beginning." Graham stepped onto a small wooden platform, tapping a mic that squeaked. Once Ruby and Finn sat cross-legged near the front, their eyes wide. Neighbors quieted. Tools went still, even birds seemed to pause. Graham spoke slowly, each word carried by clear afternoon light. He announced the birth of the Linwood Hope Trust, a nonprofit fund aimed at turning the demolished lot into affordable homes, crowned by a rooftop garden designed with ideas gathered from the children. Applause rose like gentle thunder rolling down the street. News spread faster than helium balloons. A volunteer filmed the speech and posted it online. Within hours, views climbed past 1 million. Comments poured in from far cities. Strangers offered seeds for the future garden and donated toward construction. Some investors who once pushed Graham for quarterly gains now called to back his new vision. He accepted support, then quietly redirected credit to Helen Jordan and the newly formed resident board. Leadership felt lighter when shared like bread at supper. Ruby kept her promise that same week, forming the Kids for Kindness Club with 3 classmates and 1 eager crossing guard. They tucked handmade thank you cards beneath windshield wipers and tied boughs of cheery yarn on stray bicycle baskets. Every act sparked another. Soon a math teacher brought cookies to the janitor, and a bus driver offered free rides on rainy days. Ruby marked each ripple on a giant poster titled "Waves We Made," taped beside the school entrance. The poster grew daily, like a colorful tide chart tracking kindness instead of weather. One late afternoon, Mr. Dixon shuffled into the courtyard, leaning on a fresh cane carved by a neighbor. Demolition had scattered his belongings, yet he cradled a small box wrapped in newspaper. Finding Graham alone near paint cans, he cleared his throat and pressed the bundle into younger hands. Inside rested a toy robot built from scrap tin and worn screws. Dixon said in a low gravel voice, "Someone believed in me years back, lad. They gave me tools when I had only dreams. Pass it on," he added with a wink that carried 80 seasons of wisdom. Later that night, city lights flickered beyond Graham's glass office walls, yet the space felt softer than ever. The tin robot stood on his desk beside stock charts and architectural drafts. He traced its clunky arms, thinking of Linwood House falling and new beams rising. Returns once meant soaring numbers, yet now return felt like Helen's steady breath, Ruby's fearless grin, and Finn's clear lungs. Profit was redefined as second chances measured in quieter heartbeats and louder playgrounds. The next morning, Graham placed a sticky note on the robot chest, reading "Remind me why," then locked his office and headed out to survey the cleared lot where wildflowers already poked through broken earth. Selena waved blueprints above her head while children drew chalk outlines of imagined homes. Graham joined them, kneeling in the dirt suit jacket forgotten. He pressed his palm into the soil, feeling an unfinished circle close within him. The bricks of hope were not yet stacked, but the foundation already echoed laughter and promise. The work ahead stretched long as the horizon, yet hope taller than any skyline rose in every lifted voice and every thankful smile.